Syria's last opposition stronghold is under fire. What's at stake for the Syrian government and various stakeholders in the mix? And people from Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan are getting new residence permits which will make life easier in the mainland. What difference will these permits introduce? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. Syria's last remaining rebel stronghold is under siege. On Tuesday, Syrian and Russian warplanes resumed airstrikes in the northwestern province of Idlib after a 22-day pause as the two allies vowed to, quote-unquote, wipe out terrorists in the area bordering Turkey. The bombardment began just hours after US President Donald Trump warned on Twitter that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad must not recklessly attack Idlib province. On Wednesday, he added, if it's a slaughter, the world is going to get very, very angry, and the US is going to get very angry too. With the leaders from Russia, Iran, Turkey convening to discuss the Idlib crisis in Tehran on Friday, how will various stakeholders in the crisis square off? Meanwhile, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned of a humanitarian catastrophe. How serious could the consequences be? Joining me for the discussion from London is Alexander Nekrassov, a former Kremlin advisor, and in Washington, D.C., Douglas Smith, former Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Now, just some background information about this province. The UN says there are about 2.9 million people live there. More than half of them came from previously rebel-held other areas in Syria. And an estimated 30,000 fighters from various rival factions are estimated to be based there, including some 10,000 from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, otherwise known as HTS, a jihadist alliance linked to Al-Qaeda. So, Mr. Smith, let me go to you. What's the significance of the Idlib crisis for the U.S. government? And is the U.S. caught by surprise by the timing of Tuesday's airstrikes?
You know, I sure hope not. I mean, this has been going on for a long, long time. You know, I think that, unfortunately, this will be the rare occurrence where my friend in London and I are probably going to agree a lot on this topic. You know, I think the lack of leadership by the United States, the lack of involvement, their tension with Ankara, their tension with Moscow, their tension with Tehran, obviously their tension with Syria has put them very much sort of in the back seat of an ability to try to help all the parties find a resolution to this. Yeah, I think the first thing we have to concentrate on is, without a doubt, it is a refugee crisis. I mean, there is a potential for tremendous humanitarian loss of life here. And I think that, you know, the U.S., unfortunately, has sort of abdicated a responsible position of engaging in a way to help find a resolution. You know, trying to read and understand what our president's tweets in a given moment are, you know, I think it's challenging at best and probably impossible at worst. Mm-hmm. You know, I think what the best we could hope for is for the UN General Assembly to try to bring all the parties back from the brink and see if there isn't a way to have everybody walk back. Yeah, meanwhile, actually a summit, as I said, is being convened on Friday by the leaders of Russia, Iran and Turkey in Tehran, and they're going to talk about the Idlib crisis. The UN mediator for the issue, Stefan de Mistura, said Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Recep Erdogan should call each other before they meet. Mr. Nekrassov, do you think the two parties are holding the keys to the issue? Can they find a common ground on whether or not to attack Idlib or how to attack it?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that as it is a multi-sided conflict with so many interests tied in Syria and around it, it's very difficult to decide anything by anyone. Now, in my opinion, the only real solution to the refugee crisis, or to the humanitarian crisis, as the UN calls it, would have been the role of the UN, very active on the ground, not as military presence, but special advisors and so on, flying in and out and talking to everybody, trying to at least lower the tension around and inside especially. Now, we know there are tens of thousands of terrorists in this area. The problem is that these terrorists will hide in civilian buildings behind civilians. That's what we've seen in all the previous battles, and even in Iraq when the Mosul operation was going on, a lot of civilians died because you can't fight guerrillas who are hiding in civilian buildings and between civilians and not kill some civilians. So when you say, for example, can Putin and Erdogan decide something? They can't, because the situation on the ground is such that you can't really take a military solution which will safeguard all the people who are civilians and will target the terrorists. It's a very complicated situation.
Okay.
Now, I personally think that the
Mr.
UN
Nekrassov,
is
just
to
a
blame
moment.
for a lot of...
Yeah, Mr. Nekrassov, just a moment. I've just been told that we are joined by Professor Tugrul Keskin, who is Director of the Center for Global Governance of the Institute of Global Studies at Shanghai University. So, Professor Keskin, let me go to you, and thank you very much for joining us. What is the position of the Turkish government here? Now, they are faced with this dilemma, I understand, that on the one hand, this terrorist group that's known as HTS is labeled as terrorists by Turkey as well, but on the other hand, so Turkey has an interest in attacking Idlib. On the other hand, it already has some 3.5 million refugees in its border, Syrian refugees. So an enlarged offensive will probably exacerbate the situation. So where is the Turkish government's position right now?
Thank you very much for having me. I think Turkish position, Turkish government basically is having a very difficult time under these circumstances because of the current situation in Idlib now. Because there are multiple actors are playing a very important role and powerful role in the Middle East. One is Russia, the other one is the United States. We should remember that this war started in 2011, sponsored by the United States and Turkish government as well. Now Turkish government is dealing with the Kurds as well as some Islamic terrorist groups in that area. But any involvement in that area, this is one of the most important area in Syria, actually, northern Syria, mostly Arab Sunni Arabs lives there. And Turkish government is also having a difficult time with the Kurdish guerrilla groups there. But any involvement by Russia, any involvement by the outsider, it will trigger the immigration. Big migration to the Turkey again is almost 2 to 3 million people basically. It's a very important point. I am not sure how Turkish government will prevent this mass migration to Turkey and how they are going to deal with the situation. It will be very difficult for the Turkish government actually.
Mr. Smith, coming back to the position of the United States, President Trump seems to make it very grave if the Syrian forces or the Syrian, Russian and Iranian forces attack Idlib. But what is in it for the United States to continue supporting the opposition? They're losing this war anyway.
No, I think you make a good point. I mean, but I would take a step back, and I think it's an opportunity for, perhaps Mr. Putin or others to help draw this down. I do think perhaps we can see a resurgence of the UN playing a more important role. I mean, the U.S. is clearly not serving that role, but I do think your previous guest makes an important point to focus on, and that is sort of the impact on Turkey. I mean, don't forget, Turkey is going through some pretty tough political times internally as well as economic. And the last thing that they want to be able to deal with is have several million refugees more stream across their borders. I'd like to see, as you and Sean, I'm sure, followed Senator McCain's funeral this past weekend, the U.S. sort of reemerge and taking a more responsible role in helping to, look for opportunities for peace and solutions. I mean, Syria has been a long, ongoing challenge. Perhaps before it is too late, and we are on the brink of it being too late for once more of a catastrophic situation happening, perhaps other powers could use this as an opportunity to take that leadership that the U.S. unfortunately doesn't seem to be willing to do.
Mr. Nekrassov, then, do you think Russia can take this opportunity and show the kind of constructive leadership, maybe, if I may use this word, in the meeting on Friday? What kind of message President Putin is likely to send there?
Well, as I said, it's a very complicated situation, and I think President Putin has to understand that the Syrian government wants to control all of its territory, And you can't allow a pocket of resistance the size of Idlib to continue to operate under your nose, basically. So he understands that side of the equation. He also obviously understands that the bloodbath, a huge tragedy again, nobody wants that to happen. But you know, so many players are playing this game, and unfortunately, what people don't understand is up to now, Russia, Iran, Turkey, and even Israel have done a great job of preventing this regional war, this local civil war, turning into a regional war and spreading further. So people forget that these countries have managed to stop this spread. So that's already a big achievement. Okay. And I agree with the speaker from America that the UN has to do more now. Yeah. Because it can't sit there and say, oh, it's a humanitarian tragedy, sure, oh, how terrible, and so on. It has to move in and do something.
It's good to see that the two of you agree with each other on our show after various encounters in the past, which were not so harmonious, let's say. Mr. Smith, let me ask you about the shifting, seemingly, of the U.S. Position, because President Trump first said, don't attack Idlib, and later the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, said, don't use chemical weapons. Is there a shift there? Is the U.S. accepting what is happening on the front?
Look, I think they're unfortunately just sort of abdicating any responsibility whatsoever. I wouldn't read too much into those words, whether it's chemical. I mean, not to go back to the old saying of the red line. I think we're probably reading too much into it. I think they are probably tragically sort of trying to wash their hands of the whole situation and hoping somebody else will step up and take the lead in trying to solve it, but at the same time knowing that they have to at least say something. I would like to think that we could figure out the exact meaning of those words, but I just don't think there is one. I think they're just not willing to engage and do what is necessary, and unfortunately, the president has done such a great job of pissing off the leaders of all these other countries. I just don't see them picking up the phone and talking to him and saying, hey, let's look for a solution. Because I do think there is one, I'll close, one really important thing that I do think President Putin and President Trump could agree on. There are some very bad people hiding in there from a variety of terrorist groups. And I don't think it serves anybody's interest, the Russians, the Turks, the Syrians, or let alone the U.S., for them to be there.
I got your
point.
But
unfortunately, unless we can lower the rhetoric.
I have to give the last question to Professor Keskin here. Do you think a kind of position strikes can solve the problem without causing too much of a human tragedy in Idlib?
I mean, it's very difficult to answer for now, especially under the circumstances. Remember, the 2011-2014.
Okay, it seems that we have lost the signal from Shanghai, but anyway, many thanks to my three guests there. From London, Alexander Nekrassov, a former Kremlin advisor; in Washington, D.C., Douglas Smith; and from Shanghai, Professor Tugrul Keskin. And you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break, and when I come back, people from Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan are getting new residence permits for living and studying in the mainland. Why, and how will these new papers change their lives on the Chinese mainland? Stay with us.
This is CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. I'm Jeff Moody, live in Beijing.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from Washington, D.C.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from my room.
and members of the
Mark, what can you tell us about events happening there?
politics.
This is a pretty picture. I think of the
Back over to Beijing.
to go after them.
All about
This is CGTN. CGTN. See the difference.
The Chinese mainland is issuing new residence permits to people from Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan to make it easier for them to live, work or study in the mainland. According to the regulation published by the Chinese State Council, residents from the three regions could start applying for the new papers on September the 1st. With the new paper, they will be able to enjoy the same rights as their mainland counterparts in accessing 18 types of services, including education or public housing funds. So what does this reform mean for people from these regions, and what cultural, academic or professional shifts might this change bring about? Earlier, I talked to Wallace Yu from Hong Kong, a fund manager of China Investment Corporation who has been working in Beijing for years, and Henry Ho, convener of the One Country, Two Systems Youth Forum, who suggested this item of reform. I started by asking Wallace Yu if the previous permits were unable to fulfill his needs and the needs of people like him.
Well, the old permit is essentially called the home return permit, right, which was designed as a travel document and has been used this way. It is meant to be used for traveling purposes, or maybe for short-term stays by people from Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, for example. And it has been a travel document since then, but it hasn't been able to fulfill a lot of the current demand for public services by people who have been coming from all strata of the society. For example, they could be students or professionals trying to develop career in mainland China. But of course, when the documents was designed a few decades ago, the authorities would not have envisaged the the massive demand for the public services as we see today. So I'm very glad to see that the authorities have taken very proactive actions to to make this innovation happen.
Yeah, well, according to the new regulation, holders of the new residence permit will have access to 18 different kind of services. You will be able to use the permit to register vehicles, to make an appointment at a public hospital, to apply for a driver's license, and to take professional qualification exams. And you will also be able to purchase tickets online, checking at hotels, and use financial services. And among these different services, which are the most attractive or important to professionals like you from Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan?
Oh, can I say all of them?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, I think, the scope of the 18 areas of services is actually very wide-ranging, and it covers the way we travel, the way we eat, or the way we invest, the way we do financial transactions, and most importantly, the way we interact with each other, the way we build relationships with each other. I think how different people would make use of the different services would be a question of their career stages or where they are in mainland China. But I am very glad to see that the scopes of the 18 areas is actually very wide-ranging, and it pretty much would be seen as very comprehensive. And I think on the net, it is certainly something that will enhance the living quality of everyone.
From what you have seen and what you have heard, how have your friends from Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan been reacting to the new policy? Have people been talking about plans to apply for these permits and maybe expand their projects, their plan for interaction on the mainland?
Well, from what I understand, the response has been overwhelming. And most of my friends have already made plans to make the application, or they will soon be making application whenever they have time. And to us, I think it's a bit like a no-brainer. It would be silly not to apply for this free optionality for us.
Yeah. And according to the regulation, holders of the new permit will have the right to save and use the public housing fund just the same as their mainland counterparts. This means that people from Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan will be able to purchase houses on the mainland as long as they have the new permits. Does that sound interesting, and could that be part of the plan of people like you as well?
Well, on this, I better take a better look at my bank balances before I can answer your question. But before I do, I think it would be a very welcome idea, and especially for those people who are already making plans to make property purchases. Well, I personally do not think it would really lead to a sort of sudden increase in buying demands, because it really boils, at the end of the day, the buying action should boil down to someone's expectation of the physical demand and of the predictions or forecasts on the housing market trends. But for those people who are already making plans to make a purchase, I think this new permit will give a very high degree of clarity and transparency, and it could make a lot of actions so much faster.
Mm-hmm. Well, over the past years, the interaction between people from Hong Kong, for instance, with their counterparts on the mainland, especially young people, have seemed not to be in sync with the pace of economic interaction between the two sides. And many people have pinpointed that as kind of a very big reason why there have been big controversies and issues concerning the relationship between Hong Kong and the mainland. Do you see the kind of situation being addressed, if not taking an immediate turn for the better, with the issuance of such policy?
I think it's definitely seen as a positive signal in helping to bring people together. But on your point earlier, I think it is likely a global phenomenon as well. So as we scan around the world, we have been observing pockets of so-called separatism in other parts of the world as well. And of course, there have been a lot of explanations for that, and some would try to answer the question from a social perspective. Some will see it from more philosophically. And for me, I think I have some lens from an economic perspective as well. I think the whole situation we see nowadays is maybe a reflection of the so-called extreme monetary simulations that has taken place over the last decade after the global financial crisis a decade ago, and that have created quite a wide divide between the haves and the have-nots in the society when it comes to financial wealth. And as such, a lot of people have started to question the status quo, and this is a global phenomenon. And of course, Hong Kong as a small open economy would take on such global reflections, global situation, and amplify it to a certain extent. But I am optimistic about it. I think a lot of pundits or government authorities have observed it very well and are taking very proactive steps to address the issue.
Okay, many thanks to Wallace Yu, Fund Manager of China Investment Corporation. I'm just joined in the Hong Kong studio of CGTN by Henry Ho, convener of One Country, Two Systems Youth Forum. Henry, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us exactly. Yeah, tell us exactly what was the system before, and why have your forum proposed this idea of issuing new residence permits for Hong Kong compatriots?
Well, we know that before we have home permits for Hong Kong people. First of all, it is a travel document for immigration clearance and also an identity for Hong Kong people in the mainland. It has been working well until recent years. In recent years, we have seen a fast development of e-commerce, e-services, e-government, that kind of platforms in mainland China. And most of these platforms require mainland ID card and also the 18-digit number to operate. And in this case, Hong Kong people without the ID will find it inconvenient and disadvantaged in using these services.
Right, but exactly, what do you see as the will or the wish of the central government in adopting such reform? What is the mentality behind such reforms? What do they want to do in the end?
First of all, I think the central government would like Hong Kong people to really integrate into the mainland China, to share the prosperity of the China's development in future. And also, we have an idea of a Greater Bay Area, which will be a kind of pioneering a scheme for Hong Kong people integrating into mainland. I think the launching of this resident permit at this particular point of time would really encourage, first of all, the Hong Kong people to integrate into mainland, and also those staying and working and studying in the mainland. Those people would be would have the biggest benefit from this, I think.
Yeah, also in the past we understand that Hong Kong business people, for instance, when they come to the mainland to do business, they would enjoy preferential policies, right? But slowly now they're asking for the same treatment as their mainland counterpart. How does that reflect the change of mentality and the change of comparison of economic development level, for instance? And will such measures in terms of new residence permits, will it be enough to address the needs that have arisen from the frictions that we have seen from the different level of development between the two sides?
Well, I think this is a good step, but it's only the first step. I think due to historical reasons, Hong Kong people, are treated as well, on the one hand, compatriots, but also foreigners, and some of the management measures are similar to the foreigners, due to historical reasons. And I hope that this card is not just a card or a permit, but and in future the kind of differentiated treatment will try to be eliminated, so that Hong Kong people and the mainland can have a level playing field in all sorts of work and activities, and also doing business.
Yeah, we also know that in terms of governing Hong Kong, China has this one country, two systems policy. What do such reforms mean for the one country, two systems policy?
Well, I think that's a very good question. For one country, two systems, I think in the past we are mainly concerned about economic issues or political issues such as universal suffrage, elections, etc. But I think now we have kind of entered a new era of one country, two systems, where we're talking about social integration. We're talking about many people, moving, between Hong Kong and the mainland, in particular the Greater Bay Area, and we need an innovative approaches for overcoming many barriers between the two systems. Take for example the cross-border welfare provision. When Hong Kong people moving to mainland, will they be entitled to the welfare of Hong Kong or mainland, or both, or none? These are really new questions to be answered, so that Hong Kong people could be more ready to move into the mainland. And this is one part. And also we're talking about taxation, which many people are talking about at the moment, and home purchase, etc. So I hope we can have a more innovative policies to really address to the new situation right now.
And really to connect to people, especially young people from both sides. Many thanks to Henry Ho, convener of the One Country, Two Systems Youth Forum. And that wraps up this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.